So hi and welcome to another episode of Feature Fridays, and today we're joined by Jorg Liu and Jeff Morowski. Jorg, please introduce yourself again if people haven't already seen a Feature Friday with you in it. I'll be very surprised, but let's go for it.
Yeah, my name is Cliff, based out of Germany, and I work as a technical product manager for VMware's Cloud Services business unit.
Thanks, Jorg. And Jeff, thanks for coming on. And do you want to give a brief introduction to yourself?
Sure. I'm excited to be here for my first Feature Friday. My name is Jeff Morowski. I am one of the architects on VMware's Cloud Director product, and for the past couple of years, I've been focusing primarily on the extensibility space, including API extensions and more excitingly, UI plugins.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff. And for those who don't know me, my name is Guy Bartram. I'm a product marketing director for the Cloud Director suite of products. And Jeff just provided a nice lead in for what we're going to discuss today, which is taking the session that Jorg and I did a couple of weeks back around UI plugins and taking that to a whole nother level, which is going to be really exciting, I think, for the developers out there who are looking at extending and really making VCD that front and central point for them to deliver their services. So previously we did a bit of work around the showcase plugin in GitHub and showed some of the configuration there and deployment. And Jorg, you walked through some of the edits of the code, some of the basic context menu changes you could deploy, and we actually did an iframe as well. But at the time, Jorg, you alluded to there was some more stuff we could cover, and we needed Jeff for this material. So do you want to go ahead and just explain the next phase of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So in this other episode, we saw how you can use the Showcase plugin that we've published on GitHub just to get a feeling about how a plugin itself is structured and how you build that on your developer machine and upload it to a real VCD environment. We've seen the example how you add an iframe in there, so a very basic logic to get some other content into the VCD UI. But we didn't touch any of the deeper aspects of plugin development, like the plugin development lifecycle, how you get more efficient for that. We didn't touch how to really access tenant or user information that your plugin logic might need to present any information really in a tenant context or in a user context, where to store, I don't know, configuration things from a plugin. And we have a development sandbox environment that makes you more efficient as a plugin developer that we also want to cover today.
Okay, thanks. So Jeff, where would be best to start following on from the basic overview that we did in the last place? Should we go straight into some of the Dev Sandbox capabilities and what you've specifically developed there?
Yeah, I can definitely walk us through some of that, and I guess maybe as a starting point, I'll show where that is available in GitHub, and then I've got it already cloned to my local system, and I'll just start it up, and we'll take a look at some of the capabilities of it.
Yeah, sure. So why did you create this to start with? What's the advantage of this sandbox?
So the advantage of the sandbox was it gave developers much more rapid feedback on the plugins they were building. So one of the biggest things of feedback we heard from end users was plugins are really exciting, but I need to have a VCD instance running that I need provider credentials to so that I can upload my plugin on every change and test it, and that slows the process down a lot. So this was sort of the response to that, to give them a more rapid way to prototype these things that they were building.
Okay, that makes absolute sense. Okay, and how does that cover up to sort of the latest release in terms of the functions that are available in VCD and what the sandbox can handle?
Yes, so we have a version of this sandbox that works against the different versions, the released versions of Cloud Director. So really the thing that changes from version to version is the Clarity and Angular libraries that we use. And so what I'm going to show today is the developer container that has all the libraries that work in the 9.7 and 10.0 environment. Those two versions use the same set of libraries. We also have a dev container, a sandbox environment that works for 9.5 and 10.1. And when 10.2 GAs in the next couple months, we'll have a version of the container that's specifically geared towards that as well. My answer to your simple question is already pretty long, but just to make it a little bit longer, this is just a starting point so that you're supporting at least this version and greater. We do some work in the Cloud Director UI itself to make sure that older versions of Clarity continue to work when we've upgraded the Clarity library. We have some bootstrapping and some shimming. So it's not to say that something you write in the 9.7 sandbox wouldn't work in 10.1. It's just the minimum version that you want to support.
Got it. Okay. So let's perhaps start with where would I go to get this?
All right, great. Do I do screen sharing while we talk, or?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So if I share my screen here, where you can go to get it is the VMware samples repository out on GitHub. We have a number of examples for Cloud Director extensibility. And here you can see all the developer containers, these sandboxes that we just mentioned, they all have their own dedicated branch. We also have the seed plugin that everybody's probably familiar with, the showcase plugin that Jörg covered last time, and some theme generation. So all of these things are available in this samples repository in the VMware samples organization. And like I said, the one we care about today is going to be this developer container for Cloud Director Sandbox.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The process to get it is a simple git clone, and let me close some of this, hide the sausage here. So I've already actually done this git clone. So I pulled down this Cloud Director container. You can see here that I'm working off this branch. I had already done a couple of other things just in the interest of time, but they're simple steps really. I ran the npm install on this container, and that's the thing that all of the dependencies that this project is going to use, the Angular, the Clarity, RxJS, it downloads all of those and it makes them available to the project. And so now if I didn't mess anything up, we should be able to just do an ng start here, and we'll see.
So all these steps, I remember, are documented in the README page of the repository.
Yes, they should be, and also I had written a blog post a couple months ago that covered these basic steps here, and I'm sure we could find a link to that.
Yeah,
and I had promised a follow-up blog post that I didn't quite deliver on yet, but it's a work in progress. So it's building the module right now, and this first compilation takes a little bit of time, not much. My machine's actually slower than most, and Zoom slows things down even a little bit more. But once this does finish, it's compiled and running, and we can go to our local sandbox, and we should be able to see that we've got this this outer sort of shell, this frame that looks like a vCloud Director portal. And from this drop-down menu, there's nothing yet because this is a clean container. We didn't build any plugins yet. So that's what we'll do next. I can quickly do that, unless we should stop here for some questions.
So just to clarify, now that endpoint runs well on your system and serves the sandbox that behaves like a real VCD environment, but as a developer, you can start directly without the need of logging into any cloud portal or Cloud Director access.
Exactly. And one of the things that I could do while this is up before I take it back down is if we look at the environment here, we have some simple branding in here. You could change the logo, you could change the header, and we should see these changes automatically reflected. So if I change this here and hit save, we should be able to go back to our UI, and for some reason it isn't actually changing. I'll have to see why hot reload isn't working in the I know exactly why hot reload isn't working in my environment. I just recently switched to Ubuntu, and I'm not used to having to put sudo on things, so I should have said sudo ngserve here. So we'll shut this down, and when I start it back up, I'll make sure to do the right thing so we can see the hot compile. Before we do that, though, I'm going to show you some of the new tools that we've published recently to NPM to help build plugins. So everybody's probably seen the plugin seed by now, and Jorg has shown the Showcase plugin where you actually pull these things down. If you want to start from scratch, though, we allow that pretty easily at this point. And so if I say generate, this is normal Angular CLI stuff. VCD schematics is this new library, this new tool that we've provided. And in the schematics, the plugin seed is the target. So if I go ahead and say to generate this, it will hopefully go through and prompt me to enter some information. What's the name of my plugin? We'll just call it test. For which vCloud Director version? 9.7. We'll accept the default there. This has now created the plugin structure for you, and it's done a couple other things that I could show you in the code. So now we have this test plugin directory that was created. It's going to put the structure that you're used to with the public that has the manifest and the internationalization. The manifest has generated a couple things. It's got your module in there. It's got some of the vendor and other information that you've specified. And there's a little bit of sample code in here too. So this is really something that's ready to build that shows a simple plugin. So after running that script, let's go ahead and start the container back up. Avert your eyes. And this will now recompile. And hopefully we'll see the branding change we made in addition to seeing the plugin now available.
So in effect, when a developer's doing this type of work and getting to a point where, I think the confidence level would be pretty high, right? At this point, when you've done a number of tests and you've developed the actual plugin itself a bit more, what point do you then sort of say, well, actually, we probably need to deploy this into a production system now and do some more testing?
So really, you're free to do that whenever you want. The problem we're solving here is that you used to have to do that for everything. So if you had a typo in your plugin and you wanted to fix that, there was no way to visually verify that you fixed some text strings in your product without uploading it to a server. So now you could do a lot of those more low fidelity changes in your local environment, and it's really up to you when you want to push it to a live environment and do some better testing or some more integrated testing. So now if we refresh this page, we do see that the branding was changed, so that doesn't say VMware Cloud Director anymore. And if we go here, we see that just from running that ng generate command using our new schematic tool, we now have a test plugin that is operational. And I promised it would be working. It's nothing that's going to knock your socks off, but this is just a simple plugin that shows our terms of service. It's showing that you can use our internationalization packages to load locale-specific messages from the I-18N. So it's going to do all those things. Another interesting thing that's worth mentioning is that right now, this doesn't, I don't want that view. This doesn't need authentication into a live VCD instance because I'm not doing anything VCD specific. So if you look when you're bootstrapping the Sandbox, it's skipping the authentication because I haven't provided credentials. In that environment where we had gone to set the branding, there's an opportunity to put credentials here. and my autocomplete isn't working the way I thought it would. I'll have to show you that a different way. But basically, the same way you could specify branding, you could specify that you want to use a set of credentials, and then when the bootstrap process takes over, it will look and see, have you specified an endpoint? Because that's another thing you can do. You'll see here, we're not actually proxying these calls to an actual VCD instance because we don't need to for this simple plugin. We're not making any API calls, but you can. And by adding proxy information, this allows the sandbox to make these calls out to VCD and without having to worry about CORS policies and getting denied because you're not using the right origin. So the sandbox environment does work against a running VCD instance, and it will allow you to make live API calls even in this local environment.
Oh, that's very powerful because that sort of combines the power of VCD as a backend with its API extensibility, and still you get these fast feedback loop for as a developer running the local sandbox for all the small code changes.
Yes, that's exactly right, and that was another thing. So Guy had asked earlier, like, when do you have to upload this to running VCD to do some real testing? And it's not even at this point. You still don't have to because you can still make those API calls, and the sandbox will proxy them, and it'll give you back the live data without you having to actually be in that live environment. So like I said, our goal was to tighten up that feedback loop as much as we can, and we think we did a good job over what the previous iteration was. And just to show you that the live stuff is working, um, let's remove this and let's change this to an H3. Just simple stuff. I'm a better programmer than this, but this is what we get for now. So if we just make those changes and hit save, we see that without me having to do anything, behind the scenes, it recompiled this incremental change and refreshed the page. And hopefully we see now that top message is gone and terms of service is bigger. So again, the tighter feedback loop, the incremental compilation, the hot reload, this hopefully makes that developer experience much better.
So Jeff,
Yeah, absolutely. If I remember that, especially when you do some front end development or web development, very often you fight with individual pixels to move different things around and change colors
Yes.
and typos in the text and so on. And if you otherwise would have to compile the plugin and then go back to VCD and upload a new version and publish it again and then see if I think your change worked or it was too much of a movement now, then go back to that. So this really speeds up the development process massively.
Yes.
Jeff, just that whole authentication thing was quite interesting. So what we're able to do here is send a credential request to VCD and get a response back, but that response in the sandbox isn't going to isn't going to enable you to have access to something else. You're just going to see the response come back. Is that right?
Yeah. So you need real credentials for a VCD system, and when you pass those credentials, it'll allow you to make the API calls that credentialed user would normally be able to make. So it doesn't circumvent any of the VCD security, but if you want to test this functionality as a particular user, you provide the credentials for that user, and you can do it one of two ways. You can provide the username and password in that environment file, or you can negotiate and get a JOT token. That's the header that we pass in all of our API calls that say we're authenticated as this person. You could put just the JOT token in there, and it knows how to differentiate between, is this username password based authentication? Is this just JOT based authentication? And all it has to do is, in the username case, it'll make a call post to API sessions on your behalf because you put those credentials in there, and it'll do that negotiation for you. In the JOT token case, it'll just go ahead and append that to all the request headers that it's sending to the API. So it's pretty seamless.
And
Yeah,
tell me,
that's
how
an
does that?
important feature because whenever you develop such a UI plugin, always consider the principles that we have in VCD about the separation between provider and tenant level tasks, and then also the real multi-tenancy, so separate different tenants from each other and what they can see. So even when you, of course, develop a plugin, these plugins in a real VCD environment would be, run with the user that logs into the tenant portal, for example. So it's a good way to have that during development phase as well, to avoid any issues that, well, it works in my development environment, but later when a user comes in with a different set of credentials, different set of privileges, it breaks. So that's a very useful tool. And since you can, I guess, change this and just restart the container, it also allows you to test it, the functionality between provider and tenant-facing APIs.
Yes.
And in this, I guess in the same way, I may be jumping a little bit ahead here, but if we were integrating here to a third-party application to pull back third-party information into the plugin, the user key that we would kind of get would be from VCD, and you could, catch that process within the sandbox. And then is it possible to kind of proxy on authentication to a different system from within this kind of environment?
Yes, and I had an environment that is doing that. I can't show it because it's not all released things, but basically what I'm doing is I have a different API token that grants me access to our CSP stuff, our cloud services platform,
Right.
and so that set of credentials is not in any way tied to vCloud Director. And what I didn't want to do is go through a more heavyweight process of making an API extension in Cloud Director to proxy calls to CSP and sort of manage the credentials that way. So I was able to just get an API token directly to our cloud services platform and put that into the environment. You don't get that automatic negotiation from the sandbox. The sandbox knows how to take the credentials and pass them off to vCloud Director. But what you do get is access to that entire environment is injected into the sandbox. So I can use an Angular provider and inject the environment into my CSP service, and I can get at that CSP token and manage it myself. So I can use this environment file here to control access to the things I need, whether they're vCloud Director or not. I can set up third-party accesses in here and then just access them from my plugin code directly.
That's super important to understand that, because I think a lot of the development work here will be to third parties and, well, internal custom systems as well, right?
Yep. And then the only other thing that you might want to do here is do some additional proxying. If your third-party services are sort of cores and origin restricted the way Cloud Director is, and most production-ready things are, they only allow you to talk from a specific set of origins. You might just need to also add the endpoints that you want to talk to this so that the proxying happens appropriately. But just by doing this to make sure the origin communication isn't a problem, and by adding whatever sort of credentialing you want to the environment file, that structure there, your plugins should be able to do anything they want, even in the sandbox environment.
Okay, is there any particular authentication standards that are used in this environment, or can any authentication mechanisms be pulled in?
Really, any authentication mechanism can be pulled in. Again, I want to separate out what is happening by default. This authentication that's happening as part of the application bootstrap, this will only do Cloud Director authentication. But whatever information you put in that environment structure, you're free to use however you want. So using whatever standard, if it's OpenID Connect information, if it's some sort of LDAP Active Directory string to authenticate or pull a user in, it's up to you. That structure is really pretty loose and open.
Okay. I think Active Directory is one of the things we're going to have a session on with a customer in a couple of weeks' time. Is that right, York?
Yeah, I think so. So to cover the different options for identity federation in VCD in general.
Yeah, not at this level. Yeah, but
From a cloud director standpoint, the LDAP, the Active Directory integrations, unless it's using SAML or OIDC, just a pure LDAP integration is exposed as normal username password credentialing in VCD. So that's an easy use case for this container. You can use the things that are already built into the bootstrapping process.
Okay.
And sorry, Paul, you go ahead.
Yeah, I would just ask some more question about the example and the different backend services and how you can find or where you can find them in the plugin code. So we've seen the UI, the front end part, but do you have some examples in the plugin code how you can access information about the environment, like organization name, tenant name, username, things like that? And where would you put the logic that actually talks to the backend services?
We don't have that in the components right now. It would be easy enough to add. So in this container, when you have this plugin generated, you do have access to the VCD SDK library. This environment already has it. So it's a shame that I don't have autocomplete. We do see here, this is an example in the ng-init of it's doing a query for, it's doing a query of the organization query space. I guess it's sort of an example of a couple things. You have the client automatically injected into this component if you want to do things with it. You're using the query endpoint and you're building a fluent query. So this is saying that I want to do a query of type organization. So this is going to figure out this is API/query question mark type equals organization. It's going to say that it doesn't want links to be returned. So it's going to pass that as part of the FQL. You could additionally add a filter string here. So you could make a filter builder to pass into the query builder that says, I want organizations with names like this, or whatever else you want to do here. And then the end result of this is an observable in Angular. So you can just subscribe to it. It'll make the call on your behalf and asynchronously return you the results. And when it does, you can process the results within the subscribe or within a pipe if you're using some of the new RxJS sort of programming methods. So this is an example right here of what you need to do to call into a backend. The piece that's missing is back in that proxy file, I'm not actually sending these calls to an actual VCD, so they're not going to succeed. But if I had the proxy configured and I had put credentials into the environment, when this component was loaded, so basically when this screen loads, this ng-init method is called, and this query would have happened for the organizations, and it would have spit these out to the console log. So this is an example of how you use the SDK, how you make those asynchronous API calls. It's somewhat simplistic, but actually a lot of the calls don't have to be more complex than this. Usually the complex thing is what you want to do with the results. Most of the calls to the API can be simple one-liners because of how our SDK was developed and how our bindings are made available.
Okay, so this means typically the queries that you make or the calls that you make to the VCD API, they follow the regular public API of VCD. There's no secret sauce in there, and if you want to learn more about the API capabilities, then you have the API documentation of VCD, which is pretty well documented in either the OpenAPI or Swagger-based format or the documentation, and we have that at VCD SDK component. I guess that's also a GitHub repository where we can have a look at what's available there.
Yes, exactly. And so I actually don't like calling this an SDK because SDK implies some higher order functions and processing. This is an API client. So you're exactly right when you say if you want to know what this API client can do, it's anything that's available in the public API space of Cloud Director. And there's a couple advantages to this being more of a raw API client than an SDK. Number one, it's much less work for me. And I know that's not what end users want to hear, but the other reality is I don't have to put out a new version of the SDK with every single release of vCloud Director so that the SDK recognizes new endpoints. Because this is a more raw API client, any endpoint that exists in any version of the API is callable through this. We have a couple simple methods. You've seen query here. We also have create, update, and delete that correspond to API gets, posts, puts, deletes. And then we have asynchronous versions of those. And that confuses some people because everything in Angular is asynchronous. Asynchronous from our client standpoint really means, does this thing return a task? If it does, you call the asynchronous version of the method and it'll do some additional task management for you. It'll pull the task information out of the header links or out of the body, depending on what version of the API you're using. So it normalizes a lot of the experience for you. And that's really the advantage to using our client rather than the HTTP client is we do a lot of boilerplate stuff for you. We do a lot of normalization for you. We negotiate the best version of the API to use based on the backend you're talking to. And those are the things we bring more than those high level functions in a true SDK.
Okay, yeah, perfectly fine. So if my plugin is supposed to talk to other endpoints that are not directly VCD, that could be done either by, well, the more complex but perhaps more flexible way to create an API extension in VCD and then let the UI plugin just still talk to the API extension endpoint in VCD. Or can you have the plugin talk directly to an external REST API that's completely separated from VCD?
You can have it talk directly, and you would use just normal Angular built-in capabilities. So Angular has an HTTP client, and this is what you would use to talk to most generic HTTP endpoints. And our client is modeled very similar to this, but basically, you see here, with this HTTP client injected, you have the ability to call REST API endpoints. So deletes, gets, put, post. And when you do, the first thing you provide, as you maybe see, I don't know, I should have asked you guys if this was big enough, but the first parameter is always the URL endpoint that you want to hit. And then the rest of it would be a body payload. So you can call into any other API space using Angular's built-in HTTP client. And you can use our client for VCD related things because we do a lot of the heavy lifting for you.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So as a plugin developer, where would I store, for example, this URL for an external endpoint, or where do I get that from? Because that's likely something that's, well, shouldn't be hard-coded in the plugin.
It shouldn't. I can answer that question in a second, but Guy, did you have a question about the
just
HTTP?
the return values and the rendering of the return values, or the the ability to then manipulate return values, and what Angular provides in terms of manipulation capability versus, I guess, its clarity during the rendering. How does that look and how does that behave? Because you could get a string back, you could get a whole load of different types of variables back. How does it know what to do with it?
So TypeScript and just Angular in general does a good job of not demanding that you know the return type up front, but if you say later on that that this data is of this type, it'll cram it into that data type for you if it fits. I think it's called duck typing. if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. If you say it's a query record result and this payload fits into a query record result, then it's going to treat it like a query record result. So some of it goes back to what Jorg had said, where if you look at the API documentation, it's all of the API documentation says what the type of the response is going to be, what the type of the request is, and so you can know that information up front. You don't necessarily need it here. Like, I can process these results without knowing what the results are, but all of the client API calls do allow you to use parameterized types, and this isn't the right type here, but I'll just show you. So I can say that this query is of type session type, or I could do the same thing with the creates, the posts or the gets. And so then Angular behind the scenes will make sure to negotiate the results to that correct type that you want. So now you can see that this knows that it's a session type. So good programming practices sort of say, if you know what to expect, you can tell the SDK what to expect, and it'll make sure that that's what's returned to you.
Right, got it. Okay, cool. And
even if it's wrong. So in this case, it's wrong, and it's still going to try to put it into a session type. So that's why the documentation is important.
And how about the rendering of the return values?
So that's purely going to be in your HTML and your components. So if we go back here, and what I had gotten rid of was I was putting a tenant and username in here. So in a live environment, what this would have done was it would have looked at your logged in credentials and from the client session, and would have populated them into the HTML. And this pipe just says that this value might not be available immediately, so don't error if you don't have it, but instead wait for it to be asynchronously retrieved when you have it, display it. So displaying data is a simple matter of HTML. And then in the component, I have this username and tenant that maps to those things in the HTML. So somewhere in here, I would just have to say username equals this, tenant equals this. And because they're observables, in this case, the right place to do it would be inside here. So if I were to actually get the session, in this case, the session is a typed object, so it should know that result is a session type, and it's right here. So I should be able to say this dot username equals result dot. It's not going to give me the good autocomplete, but so this is how I take the result from an API call, and I put it into a structure that my component recognizes so that it's available to the HTML.
Got it.
And you could, I just have a P element here, so it's very simple, but you could put this into Clarity card layout. You can do whatever you want with this data inside this structure, and you drive the data population from the component that sits behind the HTML file.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense now. Yeah.
And I think in the Showcase plugin, there are some places where we have that sort of structure, not with API calls, but where you get some array data structures, and then they are rendered as a list of navigation entries or things like that.
Yes.
And after all, it's not at all related to VCD. That's basic Angular development, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, might have been a newbie question. I apologize about that one.
No problem. It's good to sort of see the end to end and understand. I'm logging the results here to the console that nobody ever sees. That's not very useful, but but yes, you could take those results and set up these bindings that then drive your actual view.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And I think what you were asking was more around the configuration, right? And the rather than storing credentials, obviously in the code, we're going to be looking it up in a config file, I assume, or getting it dynamically somehow.
Yeah, so that's the next question for any now environment-specific information like endpoint configuration, things like that. Where do I store that as a plugin developer?
So you shouldn't have to store some of those things as a plugin developer. Let me go through some things here. So to test in this sandbox, we talked about that you could put credentials into this environment. Nothing about this environment. This is all bootstrapping. I should have disabled Slack somehow. Not a big deal. This is just about the bootstrapping environment and the sandbox container. Nothing you put in here makes its way into plugins. So you don't have to worry about credentials you're putting in here being part of the plugin that you distribute. When you bundle the plugin, none of this is included. The only thing that's included in the test plugin when it's bundled is the content of this directory. So each plugin that you create using ng schematics or each plugin that you import, like you have the Showcase plugin, that unit of distribution doesn't include any of this environment information. So how does a plugin running in a live environment know what endpoint it's talking to? How does it know what its credentials are? Those things are injected from the portal itself. So every plugin has access to what we call in the SDK container hooks. It's a cool name, but it's really just the idea that the portal that you're running in knows a lot of this information already. And so when it loads you as a plugin, it passes that information into you. So you know a couple things because you're running within a VCD UI. You know what scope you're in, whether you're in the provider scope or the tenant scope. You have access to the JOT token or the XV Cloud Authorization token. Because you've already authenticated in the portal, you know this. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute just so I could snooze some other stuff. And I'll try to do that and talk at the same time. So you know the scope you're in, you know the session that you were loaded within. You don't have to store that in the plugin. You don't have to retrieve that yourself. You have, so you know what VCD endpoints you want to call. And you know the credentials to use to do that, and you actually don't even have to configure any of that. When you inject the API client from that SDK that we were just looking at into your plugin, it will automatically get all of those values from the container hook and configure itself, so you can just start making API calls. If you want to store other things, like if you want to talk to a third-party thing and you need to store an endpoint somewhere there, we don't have great ways to do that in the UI plugin yet, because that's not really a UI concern. That's more of a backend concern. A couple plugin authors that I know of use metadata on different things as a place to store this. So if you have an API token that's specific to an organization for an endpoint, you could put it in one of the different metadata domains on the organization object. If you have things that are specific to a VM, or if you have settings about the plugin itself, you could put those on as metadata keys on other objects that the caller would have access to. What I would like to see, and this isn't a commitment or a promise of anything, I think the right approach here is to manage settings for UI plugins. So there's a well-known endpoint for UI plugins called settings that allows you to set key value pairs that will correspond to these things. And that way you don't have to rely on local or session storage within the browser. You don't have to rely on cookies. You don't have to build a persistence layer yourself in an API extension. You just can know that this UI plugin supports you setting key value pairs, and cloud director itself would manage the persistence of that data. That's where I think we should go with it. That's something that I would propose as a roadmap item. It doesn't really exist at this point.
Okay, so currently, likely, well, the metadata system in VCD is already very powerful and flexible, and also follows the provider versus tenant access model and the permission model. So that's a very good place currently to store that information. I think there's another advantage to do that, because it automatically needs you to think about who needs access to that data, who provides that data. Is it a provider who provides the data, and it's a provider that's the plugin auto, or is it a third-party OEM backend system, and I want to publish that to multiple different VCD environments? Then where does this come from? And I think these answering these questions automatically will give you an idea if that's some metadata on a provider VDC, because it's a backend system that rather belongs to the domain of a provider VDC, or if it's something that's rather metadata for an organization because it's more in a single tenant context, and so on.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so to sort of summarize, for VCD specific data, you don't have to do anything. For third-party data, the most common approach is metadata. The value of that is it forces you to think about sort of the custodianship of the data, and is it appropriate in this spot? And we have some ideas for more long-term things that aren't implemented yet.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay. And just so I know, being the one who's going to ask the stupid questions here, the metadata setting and changing between versions, is that something? One, is it easy to set, and two, is it consistent between versions, or does metadata change if I'm using a spare tag, for example? Or how does that impact over versions? Do we see much flexibility with that? Much difference between versions?
Yeah, so metadata is fully user defined. We might take advantage of some metadata tags to say, like, this VApp was created from this VApp template, for instance, but it's all runtime defined and runtime managed. So as a provider or as a tenant user, if you set this metadata on an instance, that that persists from release to release through upgrades, that remains unchanged. It's your data as an end user.
All right, great.
And since you can, well, define it either through the built-in VCD UI portal for certain objects in the tenant portal, for example, or of course it's also all available through the APIs. You can again make decisions as a UI plugin developer. Is that something that I, as a plugin developer, want to create some, I don't know, a configuration form, and then let the configuration form set these metadata tags to store the configuration, or is it something like it's something a one-time effort for a provider to set up, so they have to install the plugin anyway, and they can tell them and document them, well, you need to do these 3 different steps and add some additional metadata items to, I don't know, provider VDC objects, something like that.
So I don't know how much time we have or anything like that, but one thing I wanted to make sure we covered was the end result of, you've got this plugin now, you've done some local iteration on it, and like I asked, at some point you need to test this in a live environment. How do you do that? And so I just wanted to show one more piece that we put into NPM's registry recently. So this is another tool like the schematics, but this is specifically geared towards building that final plugin result. So let me just demo this and see if it works the way I think it's supposed to. If I remember the correct command. Ng run. Okay, so we're going to try npm. No, it's definitely ng. And we're going to say VCD plugin builders. So that's the name of the tool we're using. Plugin builders. And the name of the target is test plugin. Let's just see what happens. Ah, so close. We're actually not very close at all. What we're doing here now is we have this Angular file. This is standard Angular CLI, and this is all the configuration for it. So what I need to say to run is the name of this project is Cloud Director Container, and the target within it is test plugin. So we've installed this tool, this VCD plugin builders is a tool that's installed, that's available within the container. How you use it is by running the test plugin target from the Cloud Director Container project. So if we do that,
And the file where you
let's see
saw
what happens.
the file where you saw all the available target was just Angular JSON.
That's an Angular JSON, and you shouldn't have to touch that file too much. That's something that the CLI manages and we manage. And
Is your machine straining with the Zoom conference again?
yeah. Oh. We're so close, though. 92% is almost 100.
And the result of this is a simple zip file, right?
It is, and perfect. I can show you that now. So if we go into the dist test directory, which is where this built, we see that this is the intermediate files, and this plugin.zip is what you could then upload directly into a VCD instance and do your better integration testing with.
Got it.
Cool.
That makes it really convenient. I'm really pleased to have walked through this. I've learned a lot today, Jeff. So all right. Any quick final thoughts or comments before we round up?
Yeah,
I think I've said enough. Nothing from me. Use plugins. Everybody should love UI plugins, embrace them, and ask for more features.
Yeah, that's a good topic. So asking for more features, I guess we can get in touch directly through the GitHub repositories?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect. So the feedback loop is the GitHub. The repository contains all of this stuff ready for you to rock and roll. Thanks a lot, Jeff, for walking us through this today. Really appreciate your time and all of the expert advice you've given to our for developers out there. And York, thanks a lot for helping out as well. Cheers, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you. Take care.